Hello and welcome. In past talks we have spoken about two pilots who defected from totalitarian regimes. In 1953, pilot Mira Slovak defected to the West in a DC-3, and North Korean pilot No Kum-sok defected south in a MiG-15. Defections happen a lot. There have been 129 defections from 37 countries. Pilots defect for many reasons: love of another country, hatred of their own, love, money, or anything else. Some defections were astonishing, such as Wang Xiu, a Taiwanese commercial pilot who defected to China in May 1986, bringing along a Boeing 747. 3 disaffected American pilots flew to Cuba to claim asylum. The one defection that had the most significant consequences was that of pilot Flight Lieutenant Viktor Ivanovich Belenko. He defected from the Soviet Union in September 1976. He flew 650 kilometers from an airbase near Vladivostok to the Japanese city of Hakodate on the northern island of Hokkaido. That was at the limit of the plane's range. The jet landed on Hokkaido's runway, which proved too short, causing an overrun. The pilot announced to the airport officials that he wished to defect. What he brought was a MiG-25, which was the most secretive aircraft the Soviet Union had ever built. Secretive, that is, until he flew one into that airport. The West first became aware of the MiG-25 around 1970. Spy satellites were stalking Soviet airfields and picked up a new kind of aircraft being tested in secret. They look like enormous fighter planes with very large wings. A large wing area is very useful in a fighter plane. It helps generate lift, and it also decreases the amount of weight distributed across the wing, which should make it very nimble. This Soviet jet seemed to combine this ability with a pair of enormous engines. How fast could it go? Could anything in the US Air Force or other militaries keep up with it? There had also been glimpses in the Middle East. In March 1971, Israel picked up a strange new aircraft that accelerated to Mach 3.2, more than 3 times the speed of sound, and climbed to 63,000 feet. The Israelis and US intelligence advisors had never seen anything like it. Following a second sighting a few days later, Israeli fighters scrambled to intercept the aircraft, but couldn't even come close. Their unidentified target streaked past at 3 times the speed of sound so fast the jet was already out of the danger zone. The Pentagon believed this to be the same aircraft that they had been glimpsing from the satellite photos. They were suddenly presented with the prospect of a Soviet fighter that could outrun and outturn anything in the US Air Force. The MiG-25 was built as a reaction to a series of aircraft the US were preparing to bring into service in the 1960s, from the F-108 fighter plane to the SR-71 spy plane and the massive B-70 bomber. These aircraft all had one thing in common: they could fly fast. In the 1950s, the Soviets had largely kept pace with the leapfrogging advances in aviation. They had bombers that could fly almost as fast and as high as the American B-52. Their fighter planes, many of which were made by the MiG design team, rivaled their American counterparts, though their radar and other electronics weren't quite as sophisticated. But the technological leap needed to take an aircraft from Mark II to Mark III was an enormous challenge. The Soviet designers set to work. To fly so fast, the new fighter would need engines pushing out colossal amounts of thrust. The USSR already had the R-15 turbojet which had been intended for a high-altitude cruise missile project. The new MiG would need two of them, each capable of pushing out 11 tons of thrust. Flying so fast creates enormous amounts of friction heat, and so when Lockheed built the SR-71 Blackbird, they built it out of titanium. This is notoriously hard to work. Instead, MiG went with steel, welded by hand. The MiG-25 is 19.5 metres long, only a few metres shorter than World War II era Lancaster bombers. The airframe needed to be this big to accommodate the engines and the 13.6 tonnes of fuel needed to power them. The MiGs were designed to take off and accelerate to Mach 2.5, guided to targets by large ground-based radars. As a counter to the American Blackbird, MiG also built a reconnaissance version that carried cameras and other sensors. Without the weight of the missiles and the targeting radar, this version was lighter and it could fly at that Mach 3.2. This was the version spotted by the Israelis in 1971, but in the early 70s, defence chiefs in the US knew nothing about the MiG's capabilities, though they had given the name to that aircraft of Foxbat. Unless they could somehow get their hands on one, it seemed that the MiG would remain a mysterious threat. That is, until a disillusioned Soviet fighter pilot hatched his plan. Viktor Belenko had been a model Soviet citizen but was disillusioned. He was based near the far eastern city of Vladivostok, from where he flew off with fellow pilots on a training mission. None of the MiGs were armed. He had already worked out a rough route and his MiG had a full tank of fuel. He broke formation and within a few minutes he was headed towards Japan. The MiG that the Soviet Union had kept hidden from the world for several years was now closely examined and pulled apart. It was then partially reassembled and then loaded on a boat for its return to the USSR. The Japanese charged the Soviets a $40,000 bill for shipping costs and the damage Belenko had inflicted when he landed at that airport. The spectre of the MiG-25 had caused the US to embark on a major new aircraft project, one that had helped create the F-15 Eagle, a fighter designed to be fast but also highly manoeuvrable like the MiG was thought to be. Years later, the F-15 is still in service. It soon became clear that the much-feared MiG was unable to intercept the US military's SR-71, one of the planes it was built to deal with. These limitations didn't stop MiG building more than 1,200 MiG-25s. The Foxbat became a prestige plane for the Soviet-backed air forces, who saw the propaganda value in fielding the second fastest plane on Earth. Belenko was allowed to move to the United States, his US citizenship personally approved by US President Jimmy Carter, where he became an aeronautics engineer and consultant to the US Air Force. The MiG-25's shortcomings and the arrival of the American F-15 spurred Soviet designers to come up with new designs. This eventually led to the Sukhoi 27 series designed by MiG's rival Sukhoi. The MiG-25's design was heavily modified to create the MiG-31, a fighter armed with sophisticated sensors, a powerful radar and better engines. The MiG-31 entered service a few years before the end of the Cold War and still patrols Russia's vast borders. Western observers have had plenty of opportunities to see the MiG-31 at air shows, though much of their inner workings remain closely guarded. attempted defection with a MiG-31 to an unsuspecting foreign airfield. Thank you for watching.